What's going on, Lions and Bears family? Prince George here, back with another episode 4 of the Lab podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in to the last couple of episodes revolving around purpose. Today we will be introducing the topic at hand and a new theme of the series in no particular order, and that is training. And you guys obviously know the idea behind training when it comes to Lions and Bears. I've already elaborated on the theme, but I do at this time, for the first episode, want to introduce and define in more detail the idea of training. I wrote it down here, and don't mind our special guest, Baby Camden. He did not want to sleep, but it's okay, because I've been trained in a lot of ways to be a parent. You want to say hello? Still being trained, by the way. We'll get to parenthood a little later. But I jotted down here the definition of training. And it's multifaceted, but I think the underlying definition that we're going for is when you attempt to gather or gain new information, and you attempt to use that information, the knowledge that you've gained, in the right way is essentially training. Processing information, taking it in, whatever the information is. So, for example, if you want to become a marathon runner, then you have to train. You have to understand what it means to be a marathon runner, the distance, conditioning of the body. There's just so many different aspects of training. I think too many times we think about physical training, which is very important, but training, it's taking in information and then using that information at the right time to essentially get the best results in whatever you have been training for. So for us, when it comes to Lions and Bears, the idea is that we've really been training our entire lives for a particular moment. And I believe that moment is when we find our purpose, and we learn to fall in love with training when we tap into our purpose. And that's something I'll talk about in later episodes. Once I found my purpose, I've been training on top of and inside of my purpose to get better at it. But the first thing I wanted to do was just talk about, again, a little bit of my story, my background, and about how I've really been training my entire life leading up to the moment of my purpose. And I wouldn't have called it training in the moment, but I do think in retrospect, I've been training for quite some time. And there's just two things that I jotted down here for the sake of an example. You guys obviously know that I grew up playing sports. And the idea is, if one challenge, one hardship gets us ready for something else, another moment in our lives, then we have to look at the moment and the challenge and the hardship, or whatever the opportunity is. We have to look at it, if we're training, as an opportunity to learn something, to process and to gather new information, to possibly use that at a different time in our life and in our lives. And so when I jotted down sports, there's a lot of things that you can learn from sports, but the main thing that I took away from a training aspect in retrospect is that I learned how to play a team sport. And I understood how important the team was. And in a lot of ways, it would set me up for a different time in my life. But when I think about how important sports is, and there's a lot of different aspects of sports, but I took away the team aspect. There goes Baby Camden. Don't delete that, okay, sweetie? He has no idea what I'm talking about. But when I take away the team aspect of sports, when it comes to team sports, if you will, without everybody on the team doing their part, the chances of success in victory, it's not very high and or probable. And my favorite sport up until basketball took the cake towards the latter part of middle school for me. But growing up, my favorite sport was baseball. Team sport, it's awesome, it's great. It gets a bad rep and rap sometimes because a lot of people don't understand it. But my favorite position with baseball was center field. And here's a point to where I understood how important the team was when it comes to baseball and how everybody's dependent on you. So there was a time, I believe we were in the playoffs or something like that. It was a very important game, and I was playing center field, and so pop up, and it was coming straight towards me. And in that moment, I had a couple things I could do. I could either drop back, and the idea is you try to predict where the ball is going to land. Sometimes you have to move forward, sometimes you have to run back, and depending on how high the ball is, now you know how much time you have to either move forward or move back. So for me, I knew this ball was clearly going over my head, which meant that I'd have to scoot back, move back. But in my head, I go, I can catch this. And at the time, I kind of prided myself of having some hops. And so I knew it was going over my head, and I tried to time the jump to jump up to catch it. And I totally botched it. It hit the tip of my glove. And the challenge is, if you don't catch that ball, for those that don't know about baseball, then the person isn't out. They now get to run the bases. And there were people already on base at that point. I have no idea where they were on the bases, but I essentially gave up a couple of runs. I cost my team, if you will, some runs. And I want to say in my heart of hearts, I might have cost us the game with that one mistake. It really is my arrogance. And I'll never forget that feeling. The coach was yelling at me. It's like, drop back. And by that point, it was too late. And I just felt, that was the first time I felt like I really let my team down. And nobody really said anything, but I felt it. That feeling was all I needed to go, I understand how important the team is. And you guys obviously know my story when it comes to sports. I didn't really stick with sports, but I think that in retrospect, it gave me the idea of how important the team was and is. So fast forward to me leaving off from the last segment, I was talking about high school and some challenges that I had with high school. You guys obviously know that. I know, sweetie. I did not go to class as often as I should have. Now, if I applied myself, I was a very smart, talented student, but I didn't apply myself. Not really in high school. I made a lot of bad decisions. You guys know that. And by the time I started to get serious about graduating high school, my grades were horrible. And if you recall, I was talking about keeping the right people around me, or attempted to keep the right people around me. And here's where this idea of team for myself came back into play. And I kid you not, there was one of my buddies. I owe him me graduating from high school to this day. I mean, there were a lot of different factors. But he would literally, I basically just stopped going to school. He would come and pick me up on the other side of town, and he'd take me, this was about junior year, he'd take me to school at least a couple times a week, which was a big deal. And it did a couple things for me. It let me know, again, the importance of team, but more importantly, you got to keep the right people around you at the right time. There was no ifs, ands, or buts that he was gonna graduate high school. I mean, that was a no-brainer. And yet the folks that I was hanging out with prior, maybe they had other priorities at that time. I'm not judging anybody. Sweetie. I'm not judging anybody. But let's just say that I needed that person in my life. Right time, right place. I needed a team. Okay, I'm back. Thank you guys for being patient and bearing with me through that segment. But there's going to be times like that where I have to keep it real. I'm a parent. I have duties, obligations, and there's times where I have to prioritize and or attempt to do both. That was me attempting to do both. Thank you guys for bearing with me. So I was saying that at the right time, right place, I started to understand the importance of team. But that's just me essentially using that moment to apply the right information and knowledge that I've already obtained. I've trained, if you will, in that moment of sports in my life, over and over, the importance of team, the importance of team, the importance of team, sometimes falling short, and then seeing when that paid off, and also when it pays off in a lot of different ways. And so there's obviously a much deeper level that will hit when it comes to this topic of training, but I introduced it to you guys that way because if we're all honest, there's something in our life that we have to be ready for. And if we look at our life as a series of being trained, one thing trains you for the next as we're gathering information. Now, we may fall short in applying that information at the right time, but that's the idea of training. Each opportunity gives you, if you will, another opportunity to apply that knowledge in a different and hopefully a better way to achieve ultimately the outcome that you want. And again, for us, we're talking about the ultimate purpose in our lives, and that's to do something great. That is to change the world. And we essentially want to be ready for that moment. So I want to dig into this topic of training a little further. I'll share some stories, parts of my life, and hopefully it'll be a great time because it sets us up for the next theme after these upcoming episodes, and that is confidence. Once you've trained, you become confident in what you're doing. Love you guys. See you next episode. I'm out.